few hours ago, the Russians conducted a massive air attack on Ukraine. In that, several targets inside of Kiev were hit and 2 hospitals were struck by the Russian attack. In this video, we are going to check the data we have so far to determine whether those were intentional attacks on hospitals. We'll put it into some perspective, and we'll also talk about the developments along the front line, international aid, and so much more in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have struck Russian targets or continue to strike Russian targets with their drones. Energy infrastructure has been hit over the couple of days and an ammunition depot. We have a compilation here, 2 pictures from satellites that show this ammunition depot in Voronezh and the damage that was done to it. On videos, there were secondary explosions and initial explosions visible, so something was definitely in here, as we can see from the satellite pictures as well. The Ukrainians say in this depot there were ground-to-ground missiles, surface-to-air missiles, tank ammunition, artillery ammunition, and small arms ammunition that was hit here. So significant success by the Ukrainians, but the Russians have struck back. And here, over the last few hours, a couple of hours ago, the Ukrainians were hit by 38 missiles, and the Ukrainians were able to shoot down 30 of those, meaning 8 got through and damaged. Among other targets, they hit 2 hospitals. In total, 31 people were killed, at least 31. The number might still be on the rise, and at least 120 were wounded in this attack. They hit 2 hospitals. We'll start with the first one, and here we have the Kiev Independent showing the maternity hospital that was hit, but Kiev Independent says it was hit by falling debris. Now, obviously, we could speculate that it was actually aimed at it and so on and so forth, but we don't want to dive too much into speculation. So falling debris doesn't mean a missile hit it directly, an intact missile. So we skip this and go to the next one, which is far more conclusive and thus far more telling. Now, the hospital that was hit by debris was here. The other hospital is up here, just so you have an overview. Here is the railroad yard. Here's the defense ministry, just in comparison. Now, this is the children's hospital, Ochmadit. This is, from my understanding, the most important children's hospital in the whole country. A lot of cancer patients in there, and the most important hospital. And as you can see, it was seriously damaged in this strike. The surveillance cameras or video cameras have shown this missile to strike, and we have experts saying that the missile seems to be fully intact. We do not see any damage from surface-to-air missiles, and we can clearly identify the AS-23 Kodiak, the KH-101 that is hitting here. Also, the exhaust seems normal, so this seems to be a fully functioning missile that hit what it was supposed to hit. Now let's look at the position, and we have the hospital here. Part of the strike package was an attack on this installation here. This is the Artem factory. This is a ammunition factory of the Ukrainians that is 1 kilometer away. We have here a video from the space where you can see fire and damage of several strikes. Other observers have identified 5 to 7 hits, so the majority of the missiles in this region here hit that factory in this attack. Also, in a distance of a kilometer or less is the defense ministry, and here the railroad yard. So we could claim the hospital is surrounded by military targets, but first we have to put it into some perspective, as this is Kiev. Kiev is, there's probably always a target, a potential target in 1 to 2 kilometers distance. For everywhere you are, there will be a factory, a ministry, a bridge, a power plant. Something like this will always be in some distance, so this is not really conclusive in this regard. As we have the missile identified, the KH-101, which is launched in this case likely by Tupolev 95 from the Russian Air Force, they are fairly modern cruise missiles that should be fairly accurate. I have not found accurate data on it, how exact the CEP is, the circular error probable, meaning 50% is going inside that, the majority is within that circle, but My guess would be that it's at the most 30 meters. It should probably be within 10 to 15 meters, if not even a little lower. So this is supposed to be a fairly accurate missile. That one goes astray and hits a target 1 kilometer away is not impossible, but it's extremely unlikely because the missile is far too accurate. As we can see that the majority of the hits that were aimed for at Artem were successful, that the Russians managed to get their missiles through here. This makes it unlikely too that this was electronic warfare. The likelihood of one out of many missiles being affected with electronic warfare and this going into a hospital is fairly slim as well. So electronic warfare seems to be an unreasonable cause of that as well. If we look at the picture showing an undamaged or seemingly undamaged cruise missile, if we see the distance from other hits, it seems like to me with a likelihood of 80 to 90% that this was actually an intentional strike on that hospital. It might have been, the goal might have been to mask it with a strike on other military targets or on military targets to give some basis for deniability. But this seems to me that the logical conclusions, while that hospital would have been attacked, is fairly limited other than intent. Now, this is not 100% proof. This is not even me saying it's 100% sure the Russians did it intentional. But if I look at the accuracy of the weapon, if I look at the seeming lack of efficient electronic warfare against other missiles, it seems highly likely that this was an intentional strike in this regard. Also, we have to say that not only would this not be the first time that the Russians have struck hospitals, they are well known from Syria to have deliberately targeted hospitals to a degree where it was impossible to deny anymore that the Russians do it on purpose. And we have seen it in Ukraine as well, where I try to give the Russians the benefit of the doubt for as long as possible in regards to the claimed double tapping by the Ukrainians, but it's so consistent now that it's, in my mind, more or less proven that the Russians do double tapping to kill as many first aid personnel as possible after an initial strike. And if the Russians do this, if they have a history of striking hospitals in warfare, a deliberate strikes against hospitals in warfare, it seems the most likely conclusion that this was a deliberate strike as well. As said, there is still some doubt. You can still claim that this 1 in 10,000 chance of a missile going astray that far is still possible. You can still claim reasonably that electronic warfare might have just affected this one missile. But if we look at everything, the most likely reason for it is that it was intentional. Zelensky also said, going back to the overall situation, that between the 29th of June and the 5th of July, so within one full week, the Russians used 600 glide bombs, 60 Shahid cruise missiles or loitering munitions, and 40 missiles against Ukraine. So the air offensive continues from the Russians and is consistent. On the northern front, we have reports of sabotage and reconnaissance groups crossing into Sumy Oblast here, but no further confirmation that they took and occupied some territory. And I do not have any conclusive change here in the northern area of the front line as well. So nothing seems to have changed here. We have some evidence of, obviously, of continued fighting. There is some fighting in this area here where the Ukrainians recently have defeated a Russian advance along that road here. But overall, the situation seems to be unchanged over the last 2 days. On the eastern front, we do have some changes, and we start east of Sinkivka. The Russians had recently taken that tree line here. Now they managed to occupy these tree lines here. So they have advanced somewhat in this direction here, somewhat further. And at Piszczane, they have advanced significantly. 3 kilometers in depth. The front line before was roughly here, and they have managed to push down this far in a depth of 3 kilometers, and the whole width of the advance is up to 3 kilometers. Obviously not 3 kilometers here, but they have advanced from roughly here to roughly here in overall in the western direction. They also managed to advance at Markivka. Here we had them recently advancing in this area here, and now they took the area here In the eastern part of Makivka, they advanced at some tree lines here and gained some additional ground. So that's the Russians continuing having success in the direction of the Sherebets River, which is here. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have some changes as well. The Russians are having advances or are successful at Chasiv Yar. Here they have occupied several positions that were no longer held by the Ukrainians recently, but now they have permanent presence in here, both in the north of the Canal district, in the forested area here, as well as in the south here, west of Ivanivske. They have reached now the canal on the whole length here at Chasiv Yar, and this is confirmed by the Ukrainians that the canal is now the front line. So we should probably expect, we could probably color this region here in red as well. Further east, south, we have the Russians advancing here in Pivnichne. There is a geolocation of the Russians being pushed back in the, where is it? Of the Russians being attacked by the Ukrainians in a BMP-1, which is also deploying infantry, but this is deep in Pivnichne. So proving that the Russians have already advanced up to here, which should be here at this point. The Russians have not just kept their advance in this direction where they had recently had success. They managed to occupy the forested areas to the east. After this, now they have advanced somewhat further to the west, occupying the full lines of houses here, and they have advanced further north into the high rises here as well. So the Russians keep advancing in Pivnichne with a significant speed, especially compared with past advances. Now it's still just a kilometer every few days, but it's an advance that is significantly faster than we had recently over the past few months. Further south, the Russians have also had success in New York. Here they have advanced further to the north quite significantly and have reached here. Lately in the last situation report, I asserted, my conclusion was that Yurivka is fully under Russian control now, and the Russians were roughly here, I think. Now we have them up north here already, so they keep their advance north, and this should be, let me quickly check it again. Yeah, this should be roughly here in this direction. So the Russians keep advancing here, gaining another kilometer or two in the northern direction here as well. The Avdiivka area, we have some advances further west. The Russians have managed to gain these tree lines here in the direction of Losuvatske. They also had some success further south at Yevhenivka. Here they advanced to the west of it, took the tree lines here, and they gained all of this here south, where they reached the reservoir and took all the tree lines here. So roughly this whole area here has fallen to the Russians, and this here, roughly this part as well. Some of it might be withdrawal from the Ukrainians, but generally they have significantly pushed further in the western direction. This overall is an advance by slightly over a kilometer. Further south at Krasnohorivka, we have an advance by the Russians as well. They managed to gain some ground in this. I think it's the city park. So they advanced somewhat in this direction here, roughly 300 meters from what I've seen. This is the advance they managed to achieve here. We have no change south here. We have no change at Velika Novosilka, but at Orikhiv, the Russians seem to have had significant success as well. We have them here being located on this point, and this is fairly easy to see. We have this angle here, and then it's the second tree line. So we have the angle here and the second tree line, and they are now up here, gaining another 2 tree lines to the western direction, and obviously trying to push into the lines of communication of the Ukrainians for the south. But I don't see that this would be a serious danger, at least as of yet. Overall, we have the situation is interesting because Romanov, which is a Russian mill blogger, but a fairly critical one, recently said that the Russians have lost the amount of casualties in Kharkiv, which is already 1/3 to what the Russians have lost in the Avdiivka campaign, where from the big attack to the conquest. So roughly, what is that, March to November to March, more or less. And he claims that the Russians have already lost 1/3 of the numbers just in Kharkiv, more or less confirming what the Ukrainians are claiming, that the Russians are suffering heavy losses in this overall area. In the political sphere, we have some news as well. Iran and Russia have agreed to use ruble and rial for trade between two nations, and they are now enabling the banks to handle the national currency accordingly, so they don't need any other currency to work with each other and for international trade. And the Russian censor Roskomnadzor is start cracking down on VPN and voice over IP telephones in Russia because of illegal content, clearly trying to cut off Russian citizens from foreign informations, as the VPNs would obviously allow them to bypass Russian censorship. And in international support, we have the British new defense minister is hitting the start running, as the saying is. The new British government has already announced they're going to give Ukraine 10 AS-90 self-propelled howitzers together with 32 replacement barrels. This would allow them to fire at least 60,000 rounds of 155 from those howitzers. They're also handing over 250,000 12.7 millimeter it's the 50 cal 50 BMG ammunition to the Ukrainians, 90 Brimstone ATGMs, 50 small boats for rivers and inshore travel, 40 mine clearing vehicles, 61 bulldozers for the creation of fortifications for entrenchment. And Poland is, according to Zelensky, starting a volunteer unit from diaspora Ukrainians, so Ukrainians that live outside of Ukraine. According to Zelensky, it's going to be filled with volunteers, but they are going to be trained by Poland and they are going to be equipped by Poland. So there will probably be some new unit on the Ukrainian side in a couple of months. But that was already it from me for now. Today, obviously, the focus was on the hospital, where I think the most likely reason is that at least the children's hospital was hit on purpose. Regarding the accuracy of the rest of the strike, but I might still be wrong. I think it's 80 to 90% likely, but that's not 100%. So leave your comment in the comment section. What do you think how that strike was caused? And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I try to be as objective as possible. I try to stick to the truth and not just push out narratives. I'm biased in this conflict. I'm clearly biased and I'm transparent with this, but I believe that the truth should still matter. So I'll try my best to come close to it. And this includes giving the Russians the benefit of the doubt as long as they allow for it. But in this case, as said, the evidence, the information that I have leaves me with the conclusion that it was on purpose. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel, but that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching and I'll be back.